Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories.
The warm afternoon sun glinted off the sleek facades of luxury homes, their tall windows reflecting the image of a society built on affluence and separation. Kingsfield Avenue, lined with towering maples, stretched ahead like a polished, immaculate avenue to the heart of Oakwood Heights, a gated community where every inch seemed to scream exclusivity. The stone sidewalks gleamed underfoot, the Tesla and Mercedes parked in flawless alignment, serving as a silent testament to wealth and power. The air smelled of lavender oils mixed with the faintest hint of fresh fruit, a fragrance so artificial it almost seemed scripted. And amid this world of quiet affluence stood Berkeley and Row, an upscale supermarket where the price of an avocado could eclipse the cost of a week's worth of groceries for a family. Jasmine Crockett stepped through the automatic glass doors, a quiet ripple cutting through the pristine atmosphere of the store. She was a study in quiet simplicity. No bodyguard in tow, no ostentatious congressional pin to announce her status. Just a black woman in a beige trench coat with her hair neatly tied back, an old cloth bag clutched in her hand. Faded words on the bag read, "Speak truth even if your voice shakes," a sentiment she lived by every day on Capitol Hill. She wasn't trying to stand out. She didn't need anyone to recognize her. Her eyes moved over the aisles, her steps as unassuming as the rest of her. But from the moment she entered, the subtle discomfort in the air was undeniable. She could feel the eyes, the subtle shifts in attention. The elderly couple that paused in the middle of the aisle, casting furtive glances at her. The young woman, who immediately stopped picking strawberries, raised her phone, framing Jasmine in her lens like an exhibit. The store worker, who froze mid-motion, gaze glued to her every step. Jasmine had seen it before, seen it in the halls of Congress, seen it in the smirks of colleagues who thought a woman like her had no place among them. But this time, it was different. She wasn't in a meeting, wasn't in a hearing. This time, she was just a black woman in an upscale supermarket, about to be swallowed up by the weight of everyone else's expectations of where she belonged. As Jasmine moved deeper into the store, the quiet hum of classical music played overhead, a stark contrast to the tension that had begun to bubble beneath the surface. The soft white lights from imported lamps cast an almost surreal glow on the polished shelves, giving the space an air of perfection, an artificial calm. It should have felt peaceful, but instead, the atmosphere was thick with something else. Eyes lingered a fraction too long. The air buzzed with the discomfort of unspoken judgments. She moved toward the fruit aisle, the soft squeak of her shopping cart almost too loud in the silence. A couple ahead of her suddenly paused, the wife pulling at her husband's arm, the two exchanging a quick, uneasy look before the woman glanced at Jasmine, whispering something barely audible. The older man shifted his gaze, his expression unreadable, but somehow strained. Jasmine's steps faltered for a moment. She had felt this before, in the halls of power, in the face of the public, in the eyes of those who refused to believe someone like her belonged in spaces like these. But here, it wasn't just a look. It was a subtle rejection, the kind that didn't need words to be loud enough to drown out her presence. The air grew heavier. A young woman, previously engrossed in picking strawberries, stopped mid-reach. Her phone appeared in an instant, the camera pointed directly at Jasmine, as though she were some curiosity to be cataloged. At the far end of the aisle, a floor cleaner stood frozen, eyes tracking Jasmine's every move. She didn't need to look twice to know what was happening. It was the kind of silent accusation that laced every step she took in this space. Not a word spoken, but 1,000 judgments made in a single glance. Jasmine's fingers tightened around the handle of her shopping cart, steadying herself against the flood of familiarity. She had been here before. She had known this cold, calculating gaze from people who didn't believe she belonged. The system had already marked her. It was nothing new. But still, it hurt, and she could feel the anger rise, bubbling quietly beneath her calm exterior. She reached for a bunch of red grapes, inspecting the label, trying to breathe through the weight of the unspoken tension. Jasmine's fingers brushed the smooth skin of the grapes, but her mind was already elsewhere. In the corner of her eye, she caught the movement. Two figures standing at the end of the aisle, rigid and unblinking. They weren't just shoppers, and they weren't even employees. They were officers. Brad Mitchell, tall and broad-shouldered, stood with an air of unshakable authority, his face cold, a mask of control. Next to him, Kyle Harris, younger, with a buzz cut that made him look like a predator in waiting, stood like a dog on the hunt, eyes flickering with a hunger she recognized too well. They were both watching her, their gaze tracking every subtle shift in her movement, every breath she took. She could feel the weight of their stare, like they were measuring her, calculating her every step as if she were a suspect in a crime she had never committed. Mitchell whispered something to Harris, and in that moment, their slight exchange of a smile, not one of amusement, but of anticipation, confirmed Jasmine's suspicion. They were waiting for her to make a move, to slip up, to give them a reason to act. The chill of recognition crept down her spine. She had seen this look before, in courtrooms and hearings, in the eyes of those who thought she didn't belong, in the glances of senators who had made it clear that a black woman had no place in their world of power. Jasmine took a breath, steadying herself. She didn't flinch, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But she knew exactly what was coming. She had read the reports, seen the patterns, understood the game. She was about to become part of the system they believed would always protect them, not her. But she wasn't just any woman in a store. She wasn't just a suspicious black face in a space designed for others. She was Jasmine Crockett, and today they had picked the wrong person. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the cart, her eyes flickering toward the officers once more. The soft hum of the classical music was suddenly drowned out by the pounding in her chest, her breath slow but measured. This time, she wouldn't stay silent. This time, she wasn't going to let them make her invisible. The silence that hung in the air was shattered by the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. Mitchell and Harris were closing in, moving toward her with a calculated calm that felt more like an execution than an interaction. Jasmine didn't flinch, but she could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to suffocate anyone who dared to speak out. She had been here before, watched the menacing approach of authority, felt the cold hand of prejudice closing in. But this time, she wasn't going to let it break her. Mitchell was the first to speak, his voice dripping with a mock politeness that sent a chill through her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his words sharp and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. "We've received a report of suspicious behavior in this area. Maybe you could explain why you've been walking back and forth without buying anything?" His eyes, cold and assessing, flickered over her, searching for some sign of guilt that wasn't there. Jasmine looked up, her expression calm, but her voice rang out clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm picking out fruit," she replied, her words ringing louder than she intended, but the power in them undeniable. "I never thought that choosing between red grapes and green grapes would be considered suspicious behavior." Mitchell's smirk faltered, but before he could respond, the manager appeared, his presence a last-ditch effort to enforce whatever quiet power he believed he had in this moment. "Gentlemen," the manager said, his voice tight with tension, "this customer has been in the fresh produce section for too long. A few customers have reported that she's been loitering. She seems to be creating a safety concern." Jasmine turned her eyes to the manager, her gaze cutting through his weak excuses like a surgeon's scalpel. "Loitering?" she repeated, her voice even, but the weight of her words unmistakable. She pulled out her phone, opened the parking app, and held it up. "I scanned my parking ticket 11 minutes ago. Here's the receipt. I just moved to the second aisle." But Mitchell didn't even look at the screen. He stepped closer, his presence more imposing now, his breath carrying the faint scent of mint and something sharper. "Do you have identification?" he asked, his voice low but authoritative, the question more of a command than an inquiry. Jasmine held his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest, but her resolve solid. "I do," she replied, her fingers brushing her bag, ready to comply. But before she could reach for her wallet, Mitchell's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, pulling her back with a force that startled her. The metal of the handcuffs clinked ominously as they snapped into place. Jasmine's breath quickened as she felt the cold metal wrap around her wrists, the pressure sharp and unforgiving. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. The room seemed to shrink around her. The smooth, pristine aisles of the supermarket, now tainted by the weight of their eyes, their accusations. She stood still, defiant but still, her body stiff, but her mind sharp as ever. Every part of her was conscious of the people watching. The shoppers who were pretending not to see, the employees who knew better than to get involved, but also the ones whose eyes followed every movement with a silent judgment. The whispers, the glances, the uncomfortable shuffling of feet, they were all the same. Mitchell's grip on her wrist tightened, his hand forcing her to move forward. She didn't struggle, didn't pull away. Her eyes didn't waver from the cold, clinical expression of the manager who was still standing behind them, his head lowered, too afraid to speak out, too complicit to act. "You know I haven't done anything wrong," she said softly, her voice steady and unwavering, as if she were speaking directly to the silent witnesses around her. "If you let this continue, you're part of it too." But the manager didn't answer. He merely looked down, hands trembling as he fumbled with his tie. The silence between them was suffocating. It wasn't the kind of silence that spoke of peace, but the kind that rang with guilt, with complicity. It wasn't the silence of resolution, but the silence of power over truth. Jasmine was led down the aisle, the cold click of the handcuffs echoing like a drumbeat with each step. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she didn't break. She would not be broken. Not here, not by them. As the aisle stretched ahead, she could hear the soft thud of fruit rolling off the shelves, the faint squeal of an apple as it split on the floor. The vibrant red spilled like blood, staining the sterile floor with its juice. An orange rolled to the feet of a little girl who stared up at her, eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, what's wrong with that lady?" she asked, her voice high and innocent, yet piercing in the heavy silence. The mother didn't answer. She tugged the girl's hand and moved quickly away, as though the question itself was forbidden, something too dangerous to acknowledge in a world that had already decided who mattered and who didn't. Jasmine's eyes remained forward, but she could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her, wrapping around her, squeezing until the air felt thick and suffocating. It was as if the world had turned its back on her, refusing to see what was happening, refusing to speak out. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. But she would not stay silent. Not anymore. The cold metal of the handcuffs dug deeper into Jasmine's wrists as she was forced forward, step by deliberate step. The sharp clang of the cuffs seemed to echo louder than the soft hum of the classical music still playing above, a stark contrast to the growing tension that rippled through the air. Each step she took was a stark reminder that, in this moment, she wasn't a congresswoman. She was just another black woman, easily discarded by a system that had never truly seen her. The fluorescent lights above flickered in time with her heartbeat, casting long shadows on the polished floor that stretched out before her. Mitchell's grip on her arm was firm, unyielding, a silent declaration that he held all the power here. His hand clamped tighter, and Jasmine felt the pressure of it as if he were trying to break her, make her bend under the weight of their authority. But she didn't flinch. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. She had spent her life fighting for a place at the table, fighting for recognition, and she wasn't about to let this moment erase everything she had worked for. As they passed by the aisles, people shifted, glancing up briefly before turning away, pretending not to see. A man holding a basket of organic groceries paused for a moment, his gaze flickering toward her, but he too quickly turned his head, avoiding the truth standing in front of him. Another woman, pretending to study the refrigerated section, bent down to tie her shoes, her gaze intentionally averted, as if her silence would shield her from what was unfolding. No one spoke up. No one said a word, as though their quiet compliance made them invisible, as though their silence could absolve them of complicity. Jasmine felt the weight of it all pressing in on her, the oppressive silence more suffocating than the cuffs on her wrists. She wasn't just being led through the store. She was being erased, made invisible by the people who refused to acknowledge her humanity. And yet, she refused to bend. She stood taller with every step, her head held high, refusing to let them break her. She wasn't the one who had done something wrong. She wasn't the one who needed to apologize. They were. And when the moment came, she would make sure the world knew it. Jasmine's heart raced, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into her skin with each step she was forced to take toward the store's exit. The harsh, artificial lighting above flickered, as if even the store itself was growing uneasy. With every passing moment, she could feel the eyes of the other shoppers, the employees, all silently watching her, as if she were an exhibit, a criminal being paraded in front of them. The silence in the air was deafening, broken only by the clinking of the handcuffs and the faint hum of the classical music that still played, unbothered by the storm that was unfolding in its midst. She could hear the murmurs of those around her, but no one stepped forward. No one spoke up. Not a single voice dared to challenge the officers, to question the injustice that was happening right before them. Instead, they just watched in silence, pretending not to see, too afraid to act. She could feel the weight of their indifference pressing in, each step making her feel smaller and smaller. The store manager, still trailing behind, looked as though he were in a trance, his eyes averted, his head slightly lowered, as if he were trying to shrink into the shadows. He couldn't even meet her gaze. Jasmine's eyes locked with his for just a split second, but it was enough. The truth was clear to her. He was complicit. He had chosen to follow the line of least resistance instead of doing what was right. The realization hit her with a fierce intensity. She wasn't just being humiliated by the officers, she was being erased by everyone who chose to stay silent. The weight of the injustice of the entire system that had allowed this to happen crashed down on her, but she refused to let it crush her. She wasn't a victim. Not today. Her spine straightened, her head held high, and with every step, she was more determined to make them feel the weight of her presence. Her silence was not surrender. It was a reminder that she would not fade into the shadows, that the truth would not be buried with her. As she neared the door, an orange rolled to the feet of a little girl who stared up at her, confusion and innocence in her wide eyes. The question hung in the air, clear and sharp. "What's wrong with that lady?" The mother pulled the child away quickly, avoiding the question as if it were a contagion. But Jasmine didn't look away. Not anymore. This was her moment. She had been invisible for too long, but not today. Today, she would make sure everyone saw her. Today, she would make sure everyone knew the truth. Jasmine was shoved into the back of the police car, the cold, worn leather of the seat pressing into her back as the doors slammed shut behind her. The flashing lights outside the car seemed to blur in her peripheral vision, the sound of the sirens fading into the distance as she sat in the cramped, oppressive space. Her wrists still ached from the cuffs, but she refused to let that show. She wasn't just being taken to any ordinary police station. She was being brought to a place designed to silence people like her, to erase their voices and their presence. As the car rolled through the quiet streets, she could see the faded sign of Precinct 18 looming in the distance, its metal doors marked with a sense of finality. She had heard rumors about this place, stories of cases that disappeared, of complaints that were buried without a trace. This wasn't just a police station, it was a fortress of corruption, a place where the truth was manipulated, and those who sought it out were crushed under the weight of the system. When the car came to a stop, the doors opened, and Jasmine was pulled out roughly, her feet stumbling as she was escorted inside. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow across the worn-down walls, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and something darker, a rot that couldn't be masked by the harsh cleaning chemicals. She glanced around, taking in the peeling paint and the disarray of old paperwork scattered across the desks. No one said a word as they pushed her down a narrow corridor, their eyes avoiding hers, afraid to acknowledge the truth standing right in front of them. They led her to a small, windowless room at the end of the hall. The door creaked open, and Jasmine was forced into a battered chair, her cuffs still firmly in place. The woman behind the desk didn't look up from her computer. Jasmine could see her fingers moving quickly over the keys, erasing something, deleting something, as if it was second nature. The only sound in the room was the click-clack of the keyboard and the faint hum of the overhead lights, both of them drowning out the weight of the silence that surrounded her. She was no longer just a woman in a store. She was now a part of a system, one that she was determined to expose. Jasmine sat in the dimly lit room, her body stiff in the uncomfortable chair, the cold, unforgiving handcuffs still biting into her wrists. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute bleeding into the next. She was alone in the room, but the silence wasn't empty. It hummed with a quiet menace, a waiting anticipation that made her skin prickle. She could hear the faint clink of metal and the soft murmur of voices outside the room, but no one came to speak with her. They were treating her like a nameless criminal, a faceless suspect who didn't matter, but they had no idea who she really was or what she was capable of. Her mind raced, piecing together every detail of the past few hours, every interaction, every movement. The way Mitchell had grabbed her wrist, the smugness in his voice when he'd accused her of loitering, the manager who had stood by and done nothing. She could feel the tension that had built up in her chest since the moment they first laid eyes on her in the store. This wasn't just about her. This was about a system that had been allowed to run unchecked for far too long, a system that thought it could silence people like her. But Jasmine wasn't going to stay silent. The door opened with a creak, and Jasmine's gaze snapped toward it, her body tense. The two officers, Mitchell and Harris, walked in, their footsteps heavy on the worn floor. Harris was still carrying the same smug look, but Jasmine could see the unease flickering in Mitchell's eyes. They weren't as confident as they had been earlier. They were nervous, and that made Jasmine's pulse quicken with anticipation. The moment had come. Harris was the first to speak, his voice low and mocking, as if he were trying to provoke her. "You don't look like someone who's been in here before," he said, eyes scanning her with an almost predatory gleam. No wonder people feel uncomfortable. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't respond. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, the device small but powerful in her hands. Her fingers flew across the screen, dialing the number she knew by heart. The sound of the call connecting was louder than anything else in the room. She didn't need to explain who she was or where she was. She only had to speak a single name, Jeremiah. The moment the phone rang, the atmosphere in the room shifted, the tension thickening like a storm about to break. Jasmine knew what was coming next. They had no idea that with one simple call, she had just triggered the kind of legal storm they could never outrun. The truth was on her side, and she wasn't going to let them bury it. The air in the dimly lit surveillance room felt thick with anticipation, almost suffocating. Jasmine's phone call had set the wheels in motion, and she could feel the change in the air, like the first rumble of thunder before a storm. Outside the window, the quiet night held no sign of the chaos that was about to descend. The officers around her, so confident moments ago, were now distracted, speaking in low voices, exchanging glances, as if they were suddenly aware that something was slipping out of their control. Jasmine sat motionless, her wrists still shackled to the cold metal armrests, her body still and calm, but her mind alive with purpose. Mitchell and Harris had gone quiet. Their earlier bravado seemed to have evaporated, replaced by the nervous energy of men who knew they were being watched. Outside, the silence was deafening, but within the walls of this grim station, the pressure had shifted. It was no longer a matter of routine. This was a reckoning. Jasmine's mind raced as she pieced together everything she'd seen since stepping foot in that store. The way the footage had been deleted, the way the reports were being falsified, the names that had been dropped in conversations she overheard. Her eyes flicked toward the officer sitting at the desk, Turner, whose fingers continued to glide over the keys of her computer, the rhythm unbroken. Turner wasn't just typing, she was erasing. Jasmine had seen enough in her time in politics to recognize the calm, mechanical nature of someone complicit in a system designed to bury the truth. Turner's lack of emotion, her indifference, was chilling. But Jasmine wasn't about to let her or anyone else escape this. With a single glance toward the desk, Jasmine noticed something. The phone. It sat there, innocuous, just another piece of office equipment. But in that moment, it was more than that. It was her lifeline. Slowly, carefully, she inched her body forward in the chair, her wrists still bound, but her movements measured, deliberate. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the phone. It was a simple action, a small move, but in that moment, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Jasmine picked it up, dialed quickly, and waited as the ringing sound filled the empty room. When the voice on the other end finally answered, she didn't hesitate. "Jeremiah," she said, her voice steady, a quiet strength in her words. "It's me. I need you to move fast. I'm at Precinct 18. They've already erased the footage, manipulated the reports. Whitaker and Kensington are involved. I need you to move now." She hung up before the words could sink in, a calm smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She knew that, no matter what came next, the game had changed. And now, she wasn't just a woman in handcuffs. She was the storm,